I'm Deidre Malone, president of the National Women's Political Caucus. And today on Candid Conversations, my guest is Cornell Belcher. Just a little bit about Cornell. I promised him I wouldn't do his full bio, even though I want to, but he is the president of Brilliant Corners Research and Strategies, a published author. And let me just say, I've got the book right here. A Black Man in the White House, political analyst for NBC and MSNBC, and former Harvard IOP fellow, and one of the premier strategists in this country. I could go on and on and on. I just have to say that I've had an opportunity to work with Cornell in Tennessee, and let me just say his pollster strategies were spot on. Cornell, welcome to Candid Conversations.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I look forward to it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so I don't know what you know about the National Women's Political Caucus, but we have some of our members and we invited the public too to participate in this candid conversation. So we have a couple of questions that we received from the audience that I want to share with you. But what I think is important just to start us off is, as a business owner, I'm a business owner, I always want business owners to share a little bit about their business. How long have you been in business? How long have you been doing this work? And tell our viewers the services that Brilliant Corners offers.
Oh no, I appreciate it. I've been doing this business. I started doing this business back when my hair was black, so it's been a while. I started my business, like a lot of young people when I first came to Washington, uh, back in the early '90s. Graduated from college and came to Washington. And I say this to people is, young people come to Washington whether they're on the right or the left. They come to Washington because they want to service their country and they want to do good, however they want to define good. And many of us want to bring about change. So I came to Washington and just got involved in national politics and working campaigns and working for some of the campaign committees and working for get my foot in the door of polling houses. I've always been fascinated by by social science, and that how why is it that people behave politically the way they behave. Early on, one of the people who was instrumental in my way of thinking and of my thinking was Du Bois, of course, the historic
Yes.
social scientist who used social science as a tool to enlighten and bring focus to the cause of African Americans and the injustices that are here in this country. And I remember reading Gordon Parks' book biography early on about your choice of weapons, and this idea that as we as conscious people who want to be engaged, at some point you have to choose your weapon that you're going to fight for equality and justice in this country. And of course, his was the arts and the films. But
Right.
I thought, look, at mine was going to be social science and politics. So I wanted to get engaged in this. So I worked for other political consulting firms and polling firms to the point where I got to I want to be more focused on people at the margins and people who don't necessarily have historic voice. And I'm not doing it as a part of this system. So I need to I'm going to roll the dice and start my own thing, which seems kind of crazy at the time. But I'm so glad that I did. And I want it to sound like and feel like and empower in a way that that there wasn't what I felt was a firm out there at the time doing that. So that's how I got started in my business way back in 2001, 2002.
So we started our businesses around the same time. I started CMG in 2002. So you've been in the game, oh my goodness, in your own business, 22, almost 22 years or so, 22, 23 years.
Yeah, and it's tough because, as it's tough to be still a small business, but I'm
Yeah.
a boutique on purpose because I never want to be a large firm where I do cookie cutter stuff. I actually want to take on clients and causes and issues that are important to me, not just for making money. But it's been tough, right? It's tough being
Yeah.
look, it's tough being a a person of color who are trying to sell your primary product is, you know, your
Absolutely. Absolutely. I
proprietary.
get it. And I have to say, with this other hat that I wear as president of the National Women's Political Caucus, we were founded in the early 70s. Shirley Chisholm, Fannie Lou Hamer, Gloria Steinem founded us. And so with that, we're still a small business. But what we're about is recruiting, training, of finding those women who have the same beliefs that we do, that women should have the opportunity to make decisions about their own bodies, and making sure that they have the voices that they need and support them and endorse them and raise money for them to be elected to all levels of government.
Yeah.
And so we're proud of that, but we're still a small business.
Yeah. No, but you're awfully important. And now more than ever, you all are important because the challenge is great. And I think the challenge right now is that we're staring at is greater than many of us had anticipated, a decade or so ago that America would still be challenging us in this way. And it is critical for Black women. Look, whether it's the civil rights movement or the women's rights movement,
That's right.
Black women have been central to, and those movements don't happen without Black women pushing and pulling and leading in many ways those movements. And if we're going to get to the other side of this, if they were going to get out of the darkness to the and head toward the light on this, it's going to be because of organizations like you and the women that you have put in the work that get us through this darkness.
So, Cornell, big question, because a lot of us woke up, the day after the election, and we were perplexed and we were confused and we just didn't understand what happened. We knew that Vice President Harris had a short window of opportunity to try and get in there and win this election, and she did phenomenal vote she was able to receive. But what really happened, in my opinion, president that we've had before, what did the data show us? Where did we go wrong?
Well, I'm glad you bring that up because I'm actually gonna do something as I'm gonna take a deep dive into the data with you. What I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna share my screen and I'm gonna walk you through some data. And remember, you said this was a candid conversation, so
It's candid. Absolutely.
we're not holding back anything.
At all.
We're gonna be real about this. So, um, and what happened, many of you understand what happened. Deep down, you understand what happened. Uh, I'm going to give it, I'm going to give it, I'll put some data behind it, um, and put some voice to it, right? It, not a moment to retreat, but engage. I see so many of us were disillusioned and downright depressed
Yeah.
after the election, and many of us wanted to tune out, and I find myself tuning out and pulling back. Um, but it's not a moment for us to pull back. It really is a moment for us to engage. And I'm gonna walk through some of this, right? Uh, as down as we are right now, I think for this is what I tell many of, especially sort of our younger folks in politics, is that um, I came in and I went to work for a guy by the name of Howard Dean as he became the chair of the National Democratic Party at a time when when Democrats and progressives had lost a huge election and lost many of the issue battles, and Karl Rove was literally talking about a permanent Republican majority in 2004. And by the way, some of Trump's people are talking about a permanent Republican majority right now. What I will say, people,
Right now.
is the context for this is that, so we've had dark periods before, you know, where we've lost big elections and it seemed like we're going backwards before. But as you know, there wasn't checks notes. There wasn't a permanent Republican majority in 2006. Democrats take back the House, and Nancy Pelosi, Speaker. And in 2008, we had an incredible historic election where we elected a African American president with a funny sounding name. There's nothing permanent in American politics. And American politics is like a Category 5 hurricane. It is trying to tear apart and pull apart and erode everything in it. And you constantly have to be building it back up and putting it back together, because it's hard for anything to stand in American politics, because it is a Category 5 trying to erode everything. That's for context. Now, moving forward, and I wanted, and again, we're going to be candid, right? So,
Candid.
So one of the things that I've actually taken part in, and many of us have taken part in the media, is in fact the biggest bamboozle in modern political history, because the narrative that we've pushed is that the election between this Black woman, this multi ethnic racial woman, the child of immigrants, who worked at McDonald's growing up and went to public school, went to, in fact, Howard University,
HBCU.
HBCU, and then went on to break the glass ceiling and work her way through the political system in the largest, most rich and powerful state in our union of California, whose primary rallying cry is that we're not going to go backwards, we're going to go forward. That election between this woman here, as you see on your screen, versus this old white rich guy, who was born wealthy, born into a family of wealth and influence, who got wealth to start his own business and bankrupted many of those businesses, who's never in his life fought for any sort of thing in the public sector or for the working man, who's dedicated his entire life to enriching himself and his family and his friends, and used every racial dog whistle known. They're eating our cats and dogs is not an economic message. That whose platform was built on nostalgia, and in fact, I'm going to take, we got to take the country back, right? In nostalgia.
Yeah.
That election was about the price of eggs. Right?
Yes.
That election between these two very different representations of America and the future versus the past of America was about the price of freaking eggs. Is the biggest bamboozlement that the media and the conventional political establishment has run in modern times. I would say to you again, I say again, you've been run amok, you've been had,
absolutely,
you've been bamboozled, because that was not what that election was about. That was an election that was about two very different segments of America fighting for the future of this country, and one's trying to pull it back, and one's trying to pull it forward. And let's talk more about that. So, one of the things that I used to talk about, I used to, start a lot of my conversations when I was a fellow at IOP with was this graphic, because I love this graphic. And I hope, people, you folks are in the data, love this graphic as much as I do, because you can really tell the story of modern American politics going back to the 60s with this graphic. But what this graphic shows you in short is the percentage of white voters voting Republican versus Democrat, right?
Okay.
Going back to 60, going back to the 60s. Now, you see that blue line where
Mm-hmm.
Democrats won almost 60% of the white vote, right? So
Right.
LBJ signed the Civil Rights Act. And again, it was a Civil Rights Act. LBJ didn't change economic policy. LBJ didn't change education policy. He didn't change trade policy. He didn't even change war policy. And LBJ said, we've lost the South for a generation, because he, as a Southerner, understood what him signing that legislation would say. Now, I know you there in Tennessee.
Tennessee.
We're not going to quibble with the ideal that a Texan's from the South, because quite frankly, I don't really think Texas is the South, more the Southwest. But anyway, we won't quibble with that. But as a Southerner, he understood what LBJ really could have said is that we've lost the white vote for the next 5 decades.
Mm-hmm.
Because look at this, since LBJ signed the civil rights legislation and realigned the parties on this because of the civil rights legislation, um, as you see, Democrats have not won um, anything approaching 50% of the white vote. And look, Carter won in 76, 48% of the white vote. And remember, that was right after Nixon and Watergate, the Republicans at their lowest level. So you see, and even in Clinton won 39, 43% of the white vote. And look, we love Bill Clinton. He's a genius and he ran a great campaign. But
Right.
whispering, without Ross Perot, I'm not so sure he becomes president. Um,
Yeah.
so 42, that's a loss, right? And then 41, we lose both of those elections. Somewhere historically, you got to get above, without a strong third party, you've got to get above 42, 43, 44% of the white vote in order to win. So 42, Al Gore loses 41, Kerry loses, and of course 43. Barack Obama loses too, right? Because it's just 43. What? Wait a minute. Barack Obama won a majority with 43% of the white vote. What's going on? How is that possible? Many
Hmm.
of us thought the and the headlines talked about this, right? As Barack Obama's election is a racial breakthrough, right? We're post-racial. Some of the headlines even read sort of post-racial
Post-racial.
at the historic breakthrough of Barack Obama. Um, there was a breakthrough for Barack Obama, but it wasn't a breakthrough that many of us like to think about, right? It wasn't about a post-racial breakthrough. Barack Obama and John Kerry garnered roughly the same percentage of the white vote. John Kerry lost. Barack Obama won not a plurality, but a majority. John Kerry lost by 3 million votes, while Barack Obama won a majority. What was the difference between Barack Obama and John Kerry? Uh, Almost 8 million non-white voters. So it
That
was a
is so
breakthrough.
interesting.
So it was a breakthrough, but it wasn't a post-racial breakthrough that you're thinking. In fact, this breakthrough is where many of the roots of the division in our politics rest right now. Now, understand, when we and as sort of, I was part of the Obama campaign, and early on, Barack Obama talked about building a movement. Even before he announced, um, at a small table, he talked about building a movement. And there was the idea that we have to change the face of the electorate. We have to expand the electorate. We got to make the electorate look more like the changing face of America if we have any chance of winning this election. So if you go back to 08, 11% of the new vote, 11% were new voters, and they were diverse, right? We expanded the electorate
Mm-hmm.
in 08. And if you look at the electorate before, right, that the voter has been part of the electorate before, 79 versus 55. So that electorate is so much, it's younger and it's more diverse. And that's important, folks, because understand millennials and Gen Z coming in now, those are the generations where America's going to tip majority minority, right? So if you're talking about younger voters, you're also talking about the most diverse generation of Americans in our history. Barack Obama does not become president without that expansion and of younger and browner voters.
And so, Cornell, let me stop you right there and ask this question. I know you were a part of both of President Obama's campaigns. What was different outside of what was that strategy to help bring in that younger, very diverse voter?
That was really that's a really good question. So many times I've sat in conversations with with folks in Democratic and progressive circles, and the conversation would go, um, young people don't turn out, and I'd go, we don't put
Yeah.
resources toward young people, and they would go, young people don't turn out, right?
Okay.
So the difference of the strategy was this, and it harkens me back to something I talk about in my book, where Jesse Jackson goes through all the numbers of unregistered and untapped voters of color and younger voters in all these states, and he calls them just rocks laying around. The brilliant strategy of the Obama campaign in 2008 was we picked up the rocks just laying around, right? We actually spent enormous resources and time and effort going after voters of color and younger voters, right? And bringing them and engaging them in the fold in a way that other campaigns have historically said, you know, those voters don't turn out and vote, so we're not going to put spend resources there. So it was actually a strategic effort and resources put at turning out more brown people and turning out more young people, and also increasing registration. So what does that look like, right? So typically, historically, this is the changing dynamic of our country, right? So in 1980, Ronald Reagan, right? Nancy and Ronald Reagan on his horse, America was great. 56% of the white vote in 1980, and it was a huge landslide, humongous landslide, right? One of the biggest landslides of our elections in our history. Well, that's when America was great, right? Right. In 2008, this when America wasn't so great. 2008, 2012, not so great. Romney won 59% of the white vote. And very few graphics show you the difference in sort of how um, demographic changes and engaging and realizing those demographic changes actually change the electoral map than this, right? Again, when America was great, Ronald Reagan won 56% of the white vote. Mitt Romney won 59% of the white vote, and we have a majority of the way. And look at all those blue states. That's the demographic
Wow.
changes coming online, and us realizing that. And again, I remember being then I was contracted to CNN back in 2012, and I remember Romney folks really didn't think they had that election won because they knew they had ran up the white vote 59% of the white vote, and but they thought that we would have an electorate. They thought 2008 was a phenomenon. That there's no way we would have that electorate again. We'd have the electorate that looked more like John Kerry's electorate than the 2008 electorate. Our bet was that we were going to have, in fact, an electorate that looked more like 2008 than 2004, and that's what we did. And so this is about empowering and expanding the electorate in a very different way. All right, so uh, moving forward here. So as many of you all know, America's not getting whiter, right?
Right.
Unless there's a
More
plan,
diverse.
unless there's a plan that we don't know about, which America's not getting white. Well, maybe at some point they're going to start deporting us too. So but America is not getting whiter, and in fact, we are coming close to the tipping point in the next decade. And if you look at the battleground states, if you look at battleground states like Georgia, that's become to me the most central battleground state in the union, um, that that demographic shift is coming in line even sooner to that point. So you have a very changing demographic. But when you look at turnout, and this is the real issue. So a lot of us would have you all believe that elections, and some of, quite frankly, people in Washington believe this, that elections are won or lost by voters, millions upon billions, tens of million voters changing their minds and from election to election and swinging back and forth between parties and candidates. Are there voters who swing back and forth between parties and candidates? Sure, there are. Are elections primarily determined by those that now group of voters swinging back and forth? Uh, no. I think that the,
Hmm.
the largest variable in who wins or loses an election is who's turning out right now. Now, here's the beauty part. Look at this election. Look at 2012. It was historic in the Obama years because this is something that doesn't happen, and you know this as someone who works in politics, is
Right.
African American turnout actually exceeded white turnout. That was historic, right? And it was almost a realization, in the shadow of the anniversary of historic anniversary of the civil rights movement, civil rights legislation, that African American turnout eclipsed white turnout. But but look at what's been happening ever since. You've had white turnout uh, absolutely eclipsing black turnout. Um, and if you were to look at Hispanic vote, that also holds true. Look at where we 2012 and 2008 and sort of our engagement and our resources put there, and then the pullback. This is a lot more
Yeah.
important than most understand. Now, one of the other things really quickly is that this really encapsulates this notion about the elections. If you go to, this is often a conversation I have with people. I remember in after 2010, where they said, well, you know, voters moved in a different direction. So let me get this right. The majority of voters in 2008 said, I want Barack Obama and I want Democrats in control. And then between 2008 and the midterm of 2010, they completely changed their mind and said, you know what? Now I was completely wrong. I'm going to go in an entirely different direction. And Democrats get their tails whipped. No, they're different electorates, right? If you look at the 2008 electorate versus the 2010 electorate, you're getting 41-37% turnout, right? And so those are older, less diverse, meaning a lot wider, uh, uh,
Okay.
electorates, which benefit the Conservative Party. So again, there are two electorates, and we got to understand there's two electorates in this country fighting for the future of this country. Now, really quickly to this president election. So I want to give you some context. So really quickly to the last election. I was wrong about the last election because I thought Harris would narrowly win.
Okay.
Um, I was wrong because I didn't think that this bar that you see for 2024 was was probable. It could happen, but it wasn't what is probable. And what you see here, and again, remember I talked to you about the trends, the trends, the demographic trends. So every election, every 4 years, if turnout is somewhat close to each other between the brown audiences, white audiences, the electorate should be about 2% browner, every presidential election, maybe even more. So going into from 2020 to 2024, I thought the electorate would at least be 66-65% brown, you know, um, but it wasn't. We had
Mm.
one of the widest electorates we've had in over a decade. right? Typically, we see that change, but we saw them surge and increase the proportion of the white electorate. Trump was able to remarkably grow the white share of the electorate at a time when the white share of the electorate is actually shrinking. As a population, they're shrinking. So I would have
But
never
Cornell,
imagined 71%.
well, well, why do you think that was? I guess that's
Do
what's
do
really
you want me to go
concerning
back to
to a lot of us.
do you want me to go back to that picture?
Yeah, no, no, we were bamboozled.
You want me to go
We
back
were
to that picture?
bamboozled.
Look,
We were
and
bamboozled.
so here's the thing. Uh, again, we're having candid conversations.
Candid.
When Donald Trump stands up in his rallies and says, "I'm going to give you back your country,"
1950s,
that
1960s, going
that's not
back.
about the price of eggs. When
Yeah,
Donald Trump goes and says, they're eating our cats, they're eating our dogs.
yeah,
That's not about the price of eggs. That is much more deeper than the price of eggs. It's about economics, but not the
yeah,
economics the way that most of our progressive friends think about economics, because it's much more about a hierarchy and a restoration of who's in control of this country. And it's much more cultural, social, and spiritual than it is about policy. Donald Trump's not president because people thought he had a fantastic 10-point economic policy or a 10-point healthcare policy. Hell, remember, he doesn't even have a healthcare policy. He has, what was the quote? What was it? I have
concepts. I
concepts,
have
right?
plans. That's
Right.
it.
I have concepts
Concepts.
of these policies. So why the hell are we falling for this idea that it was about his economic policy and this was all about the price of eggs and inflation? When deep down inside, I bet you the women who are gathered here today know it really wasn't about that. It was about something
Right.
much more deeper than that. But we're telling ourselves this story. Now, why I say we have to engage. What Donald Trump did was not actually tremendously remarkable. Um, but you'll see he used, again, the Southern strategy to mobilize and engage a larger share of that vote. And again, if you look at places like rural Georgia and other rural areas, you see more rural white vote come out in 2024 than you even did in 2020. And 2020 was a high watermark for an election, for turnout, but somehow they squeezed even more white vote, especially rural white vote, out than they had in the past. At the same time, you saw younger voters and voters of color pull back dramatically from where they were in 2020 to 2024. And just one thing I want to end on this. Again, a lot of talk about the black vote, and particularly sort of beating up on black men about this. In the aggregate, folks, look, historically, you're going to have around anything between, even, I mean, going back to the 70s, you have roughly anywhere between 11 and 19% of black people vote Republican at the national level. Um, in the so Donald Trump, where did he land? He landed between 12 and 13% of the black vote, which is historically where Republicans do land. So,
Okay.
but but we but again, this is part of the bamboozlement. So we spend all this time talking about black people who vote Republican or voted for Donald Trump. And here's the thing, and I don't give a damn about that 12 or 13% of black people who are voting for Donald Trump. I don't. What I do give a damn about is the tens of millions of black people who feel so disillusioned by politics and so disconnected from progressives and Democrats that they reject the binary choice of a lesser of two evils and sit out
Yeah. Okay. And stay at home.
and stay at home.
And stay. Yeah.
One last thing, really quickly. And again, this is, again, going at how you're being bamboozled.
Yeah.
All these damn articles out there about how, oh, we just got to do better. We got to do better among working class white people. Got to do better among non-college white voters. Sure, absolutely we do. Don't ever say Cornell said and say we do better, because we got to compete hard for every demographic group within the electorate. But to say that she lost this election because Democrats have to do better among non-college white voters is a lie. Because what did she get while losing this election versus what did Biden get while winning the election? She got 32% of non-college white voters and lost. Biden got 32% of non-college white voters and won.
And one.
Democrats have not been winning non-college white. Barack Obama didn't win non-college white voters. And yes, we got to do better among them, but it's a lie that is the primary variable that's a problem right now in our electorate. What you do see is that, again, and then again, this is not something that I would have predicted because it's really hard to do, is that he grew the share of the non-college white vote, right? 38% of the voters in 2024 were non-college white voters versus 35% in 2020. That is, look, as it's just putting your campaign hat on, that is brilliant, right? What they did from their side. They grew the share of the electorate that was his base, while we didn't grow the share of the electorate that was our base. And I'll stop right
And
there.
it was Cornell, it was clearly, in my opinion, fear tactics, and that went to the heart of his campaign, trying to scare people. Because Democrats are such a diverse party, they honed in on a few things that Democrats were not going to run away from, and so
Yeah,
like transgender issues. And so we have to, well, the Democratic Party has to do a better job, because NWPC represents all women who believe in what we believe, but the Democratic Party, in my opinion, has to do a better job of, you know, reaching out and having strong messages that relate to every type of demographic. Don't you agree?
I I do, but I also think that the way forward isn't trying to look back and for some nostalgia, um, look back and try to win voters who are voting part of his base, and leaving on the sideline the voters that, quite frankly, these younger, more diverse, this ascending electorate, who are more with you on reproductive rights and more with you on even even sort of any sort of women's rights issue, um, and leaving those
Yeah,
voters aside to chase voters who, quite frankly, are increasingly not with you and haven't been with you for a very long time, and are also a shrinking, uh, pot of the electorate. Look, if again, let's just put our business caps on, right? If you tell me I'm selling soda, I'm selling Pepsi or Coca-Cola, and you tell me that my largest potential market for for selling my product is is with these younger, more diverse voters who are a larger pot of the potential marketplace, and I say no, I'm not going to move resources and time and effort there to expand and do better in that market. I'm going to take the smallest, a small and shrinking segment of the market, and that's where I'm going to put all my attention and focus on. I'd be fired as the CEO of that company.
absolutely you would.
But in politics,
Absolutely.
it's just Monday.
So, final couple of questions for you, my friend. What do you hope? What is your hope for the future of politics in this country? What's your hope?
I hope that you women, um, engage. And I hear a lot of conversation about pulling back, and it's a tough conversation about pulling back because, look, at from a personal level, if our grandmothers had pulled back, um, or our great or even our great grandmothers had pulled back, um, you and I wouldn't be sitting on this Zoom having this conversation right now. We wouldn't
Absolutely.
be. So I understand the desire for many of us to pull back, especially women to pull back. Um, there's no progress in this country, and there's no protections for our communities um, in the pullback
So,
because it's going to come to us.
so I'm so glad you said that. One of the things I did right after the presidential election was, we moaned, we mourned for a while. And then I pulled my members together, specifically our executive committee, and I said, okay, we've got 2 years, we got to get it together. We can't pity party. We've got work to do. So, Cornell, we understand we have work to do and we're committed to it. My final question for you is, if you had to predict, when do you think we'll have a female in the White House in this country?
Listen, the sexism is real. It is. Um, and you put that on top of um, make it a brown woman on top of the sexism, and you add in the racial dynamic. I think it's I think it's tough, but it's not impossible if the ascending, more diverse and younger American electorate is fully engaged. We can elect a woman to the presidency, just like we elected a black man with a Muslim sounding name
That's
to the
right, we did.
presidency. But we've got to understand the fight we're in. The fight we're in is for the future of this country, the people who want to take us backwards and who are afraid of your empowerment. It's, it's not about the damn price of an egg. It's about your future empowerment. Don't let them flim flam you into thinking, oh, it's about the price of something. And neither one of them can really do anything about the price of something. So what's the point? So if I take their argument out to the logical step point, well, okay, well, if prices were down or eggs were cheaper, she would have had a shot of winning. No, it's not about the price of eggs. It's about the future of this country. It's bigger than that. And don't let them fool you into thinking it's simply about the price of eggs and you need to set this out because you're so disappointed in economic policy. Sure, economic policy is important, but there are bigger things at stake. There are a lot huge things at stake. Your future, your freedoms. Look, what has he done in the first days of office, right? I'm not even being like his first days of office is he's been focused on rolling back policies and rules that are about anti-discrimination. Right? What is he doing on his
Exactly.
first day? His first day was he's rolling back anti-discrimination rules within the federal government. Why would he be doing that?
Taking us back, Cornell, taking us back. My friend, thank you so much. You've educated my members and our public, and I want to thank you so much for your time today. Remember, members, California, New York, DC, wherever, if you need a political strategist who gets it, who's dead on, please reach out to my friend Cornell Belcher at Brilliant Corners Research and Strategies. And Cornell, when we package this, it's going to go on our YouTube page, and I'm going to make sure that we include your business and your website so people can reach out to you. And to those of you who are not members of the National Women's Political Caucus, we need you. Join us today, become a donor. But Cornell, thank you so much, my friend, for joining us for this truly candid conversation. And we will have you back anytime. Anytime you want to come talk to us, you just let me know and we'll have that candid conversation, my friend.
My
You
pleasure.
take,
I'm honored. Thank you.
thank you so much, my friend. Thank you for watching.